After Dead Space was released in 2008, EA Redwood Shores was launched from a developer who made Tiger Woods golf games and various versions of The Sims, to a developer who made one of the best modern horror titles of all time, and transformed the projection of their company into something more horror focused. And it started by changing their name to Visceral Games, to accentuate the horror image that they were going for. Dead Space was a massive success. It combined elements from Resident Evil 4 with classic space horror films like Alien, Event Horizon, and The Thing, and resulted in one of the most entertaining and horrifying games that stood out among some of the other spooky shooters at the time like Stalker SOC, BioShock, Left 4 Dead, and many more. The potential in this game was noticed and EA acted upon it immediately. Within the next few years, there were Dead Space comics, animated movies, and a Wii Motion spin-off game, all before 2011 when the official sequel was released, Dead Space 2. With confidence of prior success and fat-ass pockets full of money from EA, Visceral Games embarked to make the best damn game that they could, and throw a bunch of money at edgy marketing campaigns, similar to what they did with Dante's Inferno. They flaunted their violence and gore by showing the most gruesome clips that they had to the most Karen-looking Karens that they can find to get strong reactions of disgust, claiming that you'll love this game but your mom will hate it.
This game is an atrocity.
The game is a rare title where an increase in budget for a sequel didn't completely wash out the passion and the drive from the original, and the budget that wasn't used on gimmicky ads went into expanding on everything that the first game did so well. I'll be the first to admit Dead Space could have been a complete experience, one and done, and maybe the series would have been better for that. Such a big and fleshed out world and lore made it easy for Visceral to bring in new games, and it also made it easy for fans to ask for more and more games as well. Dead Space 1 was atmospheric, dark, and full of tension, but what if I told you that Dead Space 2 did all of that and more, and did it better? Dead Space 2 took everything good from the first game, improved on some things and added some more things, and in my opinion, became the perfect sequel. Spoilers for Dead Space 1 and 2 ahead. Right before the game starts, in the prologue of the game, you get a video recording of a conversation between Nicole, Isaac's dead girlfriend from the first game, and Isaac. A video where Nicole is thanking Isaac for pushing her to take the mission on the Ishimura, the same mission that ended up introducing necromorphs to the ship and taking her life. Two things stand out about this right away. One, Isaac is manifesting guilt over encouraging Nicole to take that trip that resulted in her death. And two, Isaac can freaking talk, one of the bigger changes to the series from the first, but we'll get into that later. So, on to the start of the game. 3 years after the incident on the USG Ishimura, Isaac Clarke wakes up dazed and confused on a space station called the Sprawl that's docked onto the moon Titan. As this guy tries to wake up Isaac, he is straight up murked before he can even take off Isaac's straitjacket. And what do you know? The Sprawl is being overrun by necromorphs, and the people are either being mutilated or just offing themselves. Once again, Isaac finds himself stepping firmly in necromorph shit. On his run, Isaac is contacted by two people, one being a twitchy madman named Strauss, and another being a seemingly nice woman named Dana. Isaac ignores Strauss and listens to Dana as she guides him to her location for the first half of the game, until you quickly realize that she is not so nice of a woman. On top of being contacted by all these alive people, his dead girlfriend Nicole is constantly haunting him, looking like Billy Zane at the end of Dead Calm. Anyway, Isaac keeps on keeping on until he reaches Dana and he discovers that she's a Unitologist, or a member of a cult that believes aliens made humans, and after death, they are reunited in heaven through the power of the markers. She is sent to capture Isaac because he's responsible for building the marker that's causing the present infestation on the Sprawl, and they need his help to build more. However, they are shredded by gunship artillery before they even get a chance to take Isaac anywhere. Strauss contacts Isaac again and helps him find the marker, because Isaac is now on a mission to destroy it. Strauss informs him that the marker is in the government sector and is under military lockdown and protection. So as you stroll through the suck, Isaac comes across yet another survivor, Ellie, a CEC officer. CEC being the corporation at the forefront of galactic mining, the ones responsible for planet crackers like the USG Ishimura. Ellie eventually joins Isaac and Strauss's cause at destroying the marker, and on the venture to the government sector, Chief Administrator Tiedemann is now the one trying to stop the supercrew from reaching the marker. Well, that and Strauss's increasing marker-induced dementia that causes him to attack Ellie, taking her eye out with a screwdriver before Isaac is forced to take him out. Oh, and dead Nicole is becoming more hostile to Isaac as he gets closer to his task. It isn't until he realizes that he must sacrifice himself to destroy the marker that Nicole becomes friendly and helps him on his way. After reaching the government sector, Isaac sends Ellie off in a gunship to save her as he heads down on his suicide mission. Isaac releases the necromorphs into the secure sector to take out the overwhelming military force and to make his way to the marker. Nicole guides Isaac to a machine that she says will help block the marker-infected parts of his brain by jamming a giant needle right into his eyeball, something that's foreshadowed several times in this game. Isaac fights through his final mile on the way to the marker before confronting Tiedemann, and he is forced to kill him in self-defense. Isaac then walks to the marker where Nicole grabs him and sucks him into his own mind, where he then fights off the infected portion of his brain and destroys the visions of Nicole once and for all, and in the process, the marker. After exiting his mind, Isaac slumps to the ground, ready to accept his fate, before Ellie busts in with the gunship, forcing Isaac to leave with her, saving the both of them as the Titan station collapses.
What?
There are countless changes made for the sequel. Some are generally seen as great, where others get heavily criticized when comparing the two games. But like I said before, I think that this is a perfect sequel. And as such, I agree with most of these changes. I did have some complaints about Dead Space 1 when I made my retrospective on it over 2 years ago. Please don't watch it, it's terrible. But my main gripes were that Isaac couldn't reload while he was moving. The boss fights were really lame, except for a few like the Tentacle and the Brute. And the zero-G environments were clunky and terrible. All of these things were improved on, particularly the zero-G, but we'll get into that as we go. The shining star of the first game. The atmosphere. Dark and brooding, full of tension and suspense. When looking back though, Dead Space was pretty monotone. The same blood and grime caked metal corridors layered with industrial areas and sterile laboratories within the relatively small planet cracking Ishimura. Not saying that that's bad at all, it's just one note. Dead Space 2 takes Isaac off one ship and onto the Sprawl, a massive space station on Titan that dwarfs the USG Ishimura. In fact, you come across the iconic ship in one of the levels in Dead Space 2. It's not just the size, however, it's more so the diversity. Dead Space 2 has Isaac running through living quarters, a Unitology church, a children's school, a marketplace, underground mining operations, a government sector, and more to be sure. Each area offering different tones and atmospheres of their own. The school is colorful and vibrant, the government sector is clean and tidy, but not every area takes away from the founding vibe of Dead Space. There are plenty of maintenance areas for Isaac to feel at home in, complete with rusty metal corridors and exposed piping on the walls. The pacing of this game is also a little more sporadic than Dead Space. The combat is more intense more often, and the action movie style set pieces are definitely more prevalent. But slower tension building sections aren't thrown to the wolves. Every diverse level finds a way to build up tension and offer atmosphere to the player. Whether it's witnessing what can only be described as a zombie outbreak as necromorphs first enter the living quarters, coming across people screaming and being slaughtered, or even the last-ditch effort of a parent tossing their baby into a dryer to not risk it being torn apart by the necros. Or maybe the broken acceptance of a teacher in the schooling sector, inviting an infected infant into her arms only to be blown to bits. Hell, I feel like even the revisit to the Ishimura was done exceptionally well, with building tension, slowly reliving the past, seeing flashbacks as you walk into different areas of the ship, Isaac being just as uneasy as he was the first time that he saw the necromorphs as they tore apart his crew. The constant rapid pacing is kept up by the same loading screen hiding from the first game, with elevator rides and cable car rides, but now there's also vent crawling. At several points in the game, Isaac climbs into a vent and then army crawls around twists and turns before climbing out with his back turned to a new area. This is something that is effective in avoiding loading screens, but also raising tension. With a game like this, you just expect a necromorph to be coming around a corner or waiting on you as you climb out, but there never is one. Even as someone who played this game for a second or a third time, I still halfway expect a jump scare because it's just too perfect of a setup. But instead, they just bust through the walls to scare you when you're baited by stomping on some storage containers. The whole game is go go go, and it's real time for Isaac. The whole 8+ hours of necromorph stomping is relentless, and Isaac is exhausted. From waking up in a panic state, 2/3 out of his mind, to finding himself in his mind fighting a hellish combination of his ex-girlfriend and a perpetually static CRT television. Isaac just doesn't get a break, and that shows, but when the game finally concludes, he just wants to sit, physically and emotionally beaten. Until of course when it's time to become Iron Man when his new girlfriend pulls up to save him. And finally, the lighting. One of the main praises of the first game was how well done the dynamic lighting was. And it was incredible. Dead Space 2 took the same philosophies of using light to build atmosphere and tension as the first game. It's only that this time they took more initiative to diversifying not only the light sources, but the colors of light in the respective areas. The first initial straitjacket run that Isaac does is an amazing showcase of just how much this game excelled at lighting mechanics. The shadows of necromorphs haunt you as you run away completely helpless to defend yourself. As you go on in the game, a few areas of absolute darkness shows off Isaac's helmet as a dynamic light source itself. His pale teal shines through the face mask into the walls as you desperately try to locate the screaming enemies in the darkness. And even the colorful lights from TVs in the marketplace areas are done so incredibly well, creating such an eerie vibe to everything, and once again showing Visceral mastering the lighting game. From the level design to the pacing to the lighting to the overall atmosphere, Dead Space 2 took small incremental advances in all the key things that Dead Space 1 did so well, to make a more in-depth experience for the sequel. These are some of the more subtle changes in the game, but subtlety is good when following up something that was so great to begin with. Like stated earlier, one of the first big changes that slaps you in the face is that Isaac has a voice in this game. You learn this on the video call with Nicole where she's thanking him for pushing her to go work on the Ishimura, the trip where she ultimately dies. This cements a guilt in Isaac's brain. He feels responsible because not only could he not save her, but he pushed her into that situation. Isaac talking is a big deal, as he was formerly a voiceless protagonist, a husk, a shell, a character that allowed for better immersion because he wasn't blabbering on the whole game. Usually I'm on the side of the silent protagonist. I enjoy them in games and I tend to get lost in the narratives a lot easier. Games like BioShock, Fear, Half-Life 2 and so on all excel with silent protagonists. But Dead Space 2 made voicing Isaac seem like the obvious answer. Other than being excellently acted, it offers interactions that otherwise couldn't happen, like the increasingly confrontational encounters with Ghost Nicole, or even Isaac bonding with Ellie. Just little interactions like when Dana tries to tell Isaac that he needs to dismember the necromorphs.
Isaac, it's Dana. You have to dismember the creatures to stop them.
I know. I've had a lot of practice.
Just try to stay in one piece.
Thanks.
Or when Isaac is bantering with Ellie whilst fixing the mining machine.
It doesn't recognize a new junction.
I think I've got it from up here.
Well, maybe just rewired from down here.
What? I didn't hear you.
Nothing.
or perhaps my favorite line in the game.
God damn it, I trusted you! Fuck you! And fuck you, Marker!
Giving Isaac a voice and by relation a personality makes the game's story that much better, and overall I think that gives it a leg up over the story in the first game. Gunnar Wright's portrayal of Isaac gives us a more complete character, one with emotions and a moral compass. It just makes the events of the game that much more palpable. Giving a set personality and a voice to a character can definitely have drawbacks, even in games where I like the protagonist a lot. There is still a chance for a cheesy or out of place line, like Jesse in Control saying, "That was awesome," at the end of the ashtray maze. Yeah, it was awesome, but you didn't need to say it, Jesse.
That was awesome.
As far as the plot as a whole, I think the story comes through strong and continues the tale from the first, but also like the first, you can play this game and not really care about the story at all, and not get any less of the game from it. The plot is good, but it's just not the selling point of the Dead Space series. The atmosphere and the gameplay takes center stage, and there's no knocking that. That being said, there is a lot more attention to detail here. I found myself being a little more interested in the many hands at play, whether it's Unitology, EarthGov, or CEC, and I walked away from the game knowing a bit more about the lore than I did from the first game. I honestly couldn't tell you the overarching plot of the first game without looking it up first. The elements of horror still shine through incredibly strong. Many people refer to this game as an all-action, no-horror game, but there are genuinely chilling and memorable moments in this game that are nothing less than horror. The recurring apparitions of Nicole looming in corners to confront Isaac, the woman calling for the necromorph baby and cradling it in her arms before bursting into her best acrylic paint impersonation, Ellie's eyeball being impaled on a screwdriver that is then used by Strauss to try to kill Isaac. And on the subject of eyeballs, perhaps the iconic scene of the game is the player-controlled insertion of a needle into Isaac's eye that is gruesome whether you do it right or fail miserably. All these moments are genuinely unsettling and paint a picture of horror that you just can't deny. Even though these are great, I can't say that they surpass moments from the first game, like the initial encounter of the necromorphs when they hop on your crew, or the man that's banging his head against the wall, the tentacle grab, and of course, Nicole in the cockpit right before the credits roll. Dead Space was iconic in its own right, and I can only say that the sequel is on par with these horror moments. Of my complaints from the first game, all of them involve the gameplay. Isaac couldn't initiate a reload if he was moving, the boss fights were underwhelming, and zero-G environments were absolute ass. Isaac moves more fluid altogether in this game, and yes, he can now reload as he's doing it. Isaac must have learned how to move while he was lost in his advanced dementia, because dude can dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge again. Combat flows great, still using the excellent strategic dismemberment brought to fruition in the first game. Other mechanics that were used in the first game are given a lot more emphasis in this game as well, particularly telekinesis and stasis. Telekinesis is used pretty heavily in the opening chapter of the game before Isaac receives a plasma cutter to do his thing. It's not a mechanic that I used very often in the first game, but it's damn near necessary in Dead Space 2 just due to the amount of enemies thrown at you at one time. There is an added bonus of using the necromorph claws to impale another necromorph to the wall. The melee and stomp mechanics were also pushed more in this game, particularly the stomp, as you're encouraged to stomp on these corpses to receive loot and such, instead of the loot just dropping after the enemy dies. Not only were the boss fights systematically improved, but the enemies in general were a great addition to this game. The recurring boss-like enemies are the tripods and the brutes, encountered multiple times, and each time they are good fights and a lot of fun. The major bosses of the game are a bit different. The Tormentor is an awesome boss, and the fight is an awesome set piece. It's one of the most action-packed part of the games, but it's heavily scripted and requires low input from the player to progress compared to the tripods or the brutes. The final fight inside of Isaac's head with the marker and Nicole is one of the lamer fights. It just involves waves of the children necromorphs and shooting the marker when it's vulnerable, and then there's the Ubermorph. Honestly, he's a great enemy, a regenerator necromorph similar to the Hunter from Dead Space 1 that you whittle down to stubs before running a few dozen yards and he's back up again with fresh new limbs. He just wasn't much of a threat because he stayed down long enough to kill all the other enemies before he was back up and moving. And there's also plenty of stasis modules around to keep him slowed down pretty good. Other than the bosses and the pseudo bosses though, there were new additions to the necromorph army that were a lot of fun. First and foremost, Stalkers. Stalkers are like the velociraptors from Jurassic Park. They seem to toy with you as you try to kill them. They make these sinister noises, and as they peek around at you, they work as a group to surround you like a pack of wolves. They are probably the creepiest part of this game, and it's not because this isn't a creepy game. These guys are actually pretty scary. On their first encounter in the depths of the Unitology church, you are quickly made aware that there are enemies lurking, clicking and chirping as they run from cover to cover trying to ambush you, or surround you, or, well, stalk you. And these aren't the Straylock type of stalkers, but more akin to Richard Ramirez, trying to sneak into your house at night and steal your famous Amos cookies. Stalkers are by far the best enemy in this game, and maybe the whole series. I don't know though, I do like those wiggly arm boys that look like Slender Man in a lab coat before breaking into a bunch of small guys. He's a lot of fun too, but Stalkers are awesome. Then there's the Pukers. They suck. Not because of the damage done, but if you get his emesis on you, then you will be dramatically slowed while other more threatening things try to rip your eyeballs out. And then the children. I ended up just pistol whipping these fuckers in the face a lot of the time, but it didn't help to deal with just how unsettling they are and the whole level that they're introduced in general. And if the toddlers weren't enough, then there's these exploding fucking infants too. Jesus, Visceral, did you not learn anything from Dante's Inferno? Then there's these perirectal abscesses that aren't even really an enemy. They just sit on the floor or on the wall and they spit hot fecal matter onto you. And if you shoot them, they immediately commit seppuku. And if you happen not to see one, well, you're just dead. It's instant death. The deep space tree thing is another enemy that is okay, I guess. I mean, I guess you need to have an enemy to fight while you're in 0G. It can't be all fun and puzzles in Dead Space. Speaking of 0G though, perhaps one of the greatest improvements this game has to offer is the 0G mechanics. 0G was improved 1,000 times over with 360 movement. Repositioning the satellite arrays was one of my favorite levels just in the sense of being isolated in space, and the new and improved 0G controls made it feel appropriate navigating the open darkness of space. The clunkiness of the first game just left a sour taste in my mouth for these portions of the game, especially after playing the mechanics from this game and then going back to the first. People tend to think EA got their hands too deep in the Dead Space cookie jar and made an instant classic horror game into a superficial action shooter. But I feel like Dead Space 2 only amplified what was already set out by Dead Space 1. Nothing grandiose or over the top, just an overall amplification on everything established in the prior game. Except maybe the few times where they were trying to flex at Marvel, like saying, hey, we can make a pretty sick Iron Man game. Wink wink. The game was received very well, critics scoring it about the same across the board as its predecessor. But despite this, Dead Space 2 bombed in retail. 2 million copies were sold in the first week, but altogether reached only 4 million units sold. Now, 4 million units is a lot. That's 4 times the amount of units that Dead Space 1 sold. The elephant in the room here is the $120 million budget that EA spent on this game. I'm not sure if they made a loss on this game or if they just didn't reach the profit goals that they wanted to, but EA considers this game a flop. Maybe they should have just calmed down a little bit on the massive marketing campaign to save a few dollars, but who knows, maybe the sales would have dropped if they didn't show how much your mom hated Dead Space 2. Even a decade after its release, Dead Space 2 can stand on its own, a horrifying and entertaining experience. Everything was as good as it could be. The atmosphere, the level designs, the combat, the enemies, the narrative, even Isaac himself, all top-notch and memorable, despite being made for hardware that is now 2 generations old. But it's no secret Dead Space 3 took off with the action and left the horror, similar to Resident Evil 6. But maybe one day EA will revitalize this series and bring it back to its roots. If not, at least we can hope for the Callisto Protocol, being developed by Striking Distance Studios, which is headed by the Dead Space creator Glenn Schofield. But if all else fails, Dead Space 2 is still here, in all its gory glory. Thank you for watching. I truly hope that you enjoyed it. If you're interested in my take on Dead Space 3, let me know. I'd love to take a crack at it. Till next time, peace.